Okay, picking up on page 476, we're talking about users training and having a plan. And it's essential to provide the right training to the right person. So you're probably going to have to go to the organization chart and find out who's responsible for doing what and provide them targeted training for their particular need. So identifying who is an important thing, and you're probably going to need management's help in that. And then you have to look very carefully to make sure you're providing the right kind of training to the right kind of folk. The type of training that you do to users is not going to be the same as managers. And I've already mentioned to you before, don't put users and managers in the same room at the same time whenever you expect to have questions. Because managers are not going to ask questions in front of their own employees. They don't want to look dumb. And the type of training that you're talking about is going to be different. The management training is going to be more about here's what it's for, here are what the goals of the system are, here's how it can help you manage your capabilities. Users they don't really care about whether or not this is going to make the company more efficient. Well, okay, maybe they do. But they're into the weeds about, okay, what do I do next? I push this button. What's going to happen next? They're very, very detail oriented on how do I use this to do my job. Where the managers have a slightly higher altitude, so to speak, and saying, how is this useful? How is this good? And then, of course, the IT staff, completely different. Here's how you do backups. Here's how you do this. All the things that they need to do. Here's how you install it. Here's how you maintain it. So those kinds of things that has to happen. Anyway, they talk about the types of training that you can get. Vendor training. Vendors can come in and do training on their particular pieces. Webinars, podcasts, tutorials. And, of course, online training and video training like what we're doing now. There's some pretty cool things on. They talk about training tips on page 479. That the IT staff typically are the ones that are going to be training the people, and you train them in small groups, particularly if it's the users. Some people are very visceral, hands-on, and that's the only way they're going to learn. So you quite literally might have to go to them, sit behind them, and show them how something works. And you might have 2 or 3 people in a little small group. That works fairly well. Obviously, you get more than 2 or 3. You won't fit in a cube or wherever these guys are working. So select the most effective place to do the training. Sometimes that is the workplace. Sometimes it's someplace else. Don't go to a conference room where there's no computers and say, well, here's how you do this. Because they're just going to be furiously taking notes on step 1, step 2, step 2, and not paying attention to anything you're doing, because they're furiously taking notes. If they had a machine in front of them, they could be following along. And then, of course, you do have to provide an opportunity for people to watch and to do and to listen. And then, of course, if you have some training expertise or some people who've done training before, use them to help out. Okay, we talked about online training and video training. I'm going to skip over that because, heck, we're doing that now. This is online training. So I think you kind of got those concepts down. Let's skip on page 484 and talk about the data conversion. So if you're replacing an existing system, more than likely you're going to pull some or all of the data from the old system to the new. They have some pretty cool techniques. There's this thing called ODBC, Open Database Connectivity, and it's specifically designed so that I can have one database tap into another database, and even if it's not the same vendor, there's probably some vendor ODBC driver you can install on one machine. You're only going to do the conversion once, so you go to one machine, you install the software for both databases, and use this connectivity kind of a thing to pull the data across, and it works fairly well. I've never run across a scenario where I couldn't connect the 2 databases and pull. I'm sure somebody out there has some ancient database, but typically everyone plays. Okay, and they talk about data conversion and controls, and at no time during this conversion, even on this machine where you're temporarily doing the conversion, do you lose control, particularly security, lose control of the data. If you've got names and social security numbers and stuffing, and you're washing it through like an Excel spreadsheet in order to do something before it goes, you got to make sure that when you're done, that you delete those files, because this conversion process has got to meet that integrity requirement. You can't just say, oh, well, we're going to turn all the controls off while we're doing this conversion, and then next week we'll turn all the controls back on. No. Somehow the law doesn't really much care that you temporarily turn them off and somebody came in and stole it that weekend. Yeah, sorry. Lawyers are going to have a field day with that. So yes, make sure all the controls are in place. And then talk about the system changeover. There are some strategies for doing system changeovers. The first one is talking about, just direct conversion. And that basically means Friday the 22nd, we're going to shut the old system down and pick up the new system. And that, of course, is the one that's fraught with the most danger. Users are going to be stunned when they come in the next day and the old system is gone, the new one's there, and they go, what am I supposed to do? It happens. And so practically no one does this just because it's too disruptive and the chance of a failure is so great. And again, there's nothing really wrong with that. But when you look at the other alternatives, you'll quickly see that there's just no need for doing direct conversion. Okay, it's usually the least expensive of the approach, but that's short-term thinking. Expensive from the aspect of I don't have to pay some, for two systems at the same time. But from the productivity point of view, no way. The next one is the parallel operations, where I run the old and the new simultaneously and allow people to... Now, unfortunately, this is kind of annoying because I have to enter the data in the old and the new, both. So it's going to slow me down. Instead of just typing, all my data over here, I have to type all my data over here and then type all my data over here. So it's twice the entry, unless, of course, you could have some way of doing some data conversion during this parallel operation. So parallel operation works pretty good, and it provides an opportunity for people to actually get accustomed to it before they have to do something. So yeah, it definitely lowers the risk, and you could this provides you a fail-safe. If halfway through your parallel operation your new system tanked, you just go back to the old. It's no big deal. So there's practically no risk of failure on parallel operation. I kind of like that. The next one is the pilot operation, where you pick one organization or one part. Let's say, for example, you say, okay, we're going to go to the Chicago plant, and we're going to use the new system there. Now, everyone else is going to use the old system, and they're going to work out the bugs for us. And once we get all the bugs worked out, and then we're going to just do a switch over to everyone else. Now, that works fairly well. And you do have to have somebody to volunteer to be the pilot. And typically that won't be difficult, believe it or not. So yes, people volunteer and you can get lessons learned, kind of tweak it and kind of go. The most obvious one that everyone typically tries to go for is this phased operation. And that is, I start with the Chicago plant and I do that. And then I go to the Atlanta plant and I do that. And I go to the next plant and I do that. Now this works really well if you have a roving team that does this. The team of developers and trainers, they spend 2 weeks at this one location and get them crossed over. And then they go the next 2 weeks on the calendar, they go to this organization and do, switch them over. And so this is least expensive from a training perspective, and this a roving team of 5 or 6 people can just run across the nation, slowly converting you over. So this is probably one of the best. It is rather expensive. But it does provide an opportunity for lessons learned. Again, that first organization is going to be the most impacted. By the time you get to the last one, it's going to be, oh yeah, I know we're going to have this data conversion problem because we've had it every other place. So you need to go into the database and check this field to make sure it's got this in it because that screwed us up the last 4 times we did this. So excellent way of doing business. So I would recommend, if at all possible, do phased operation. There's a chart on page 487 that just basically talks about the risks and the cost of doing these things, and yeah, it's pretty simple. Okay, on page 487 they talk about the post-implementation evaluation. So I've got my system installed, it's up and running, but in order for me to assure that I've done everything I said I'm going to do, I really need to go back and check the system specifications and like a checklist. Go through, did it do this? Yep. Did it do this? Yep. You need to go through and see if you did everything you said you were going to do. Evaluate the training. Evaluate every piece of the system that occurred. So, the accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of the information system output, user satisfaction, are they happy with the new system? The reliability and maintenance, adequacy of the controls and security measures, hardware and platform, the effectiveness of the database, how the IT team handle things, and how the documentation, the quality and effectiveness of training, the accuracy of these cost estimates that you put together, because you put together a cost-benefit ratio somewhere down the line that said, okay, we're going to switch to a new system, it's going to make us twice as more efficient, we're going to save this amount of money. Now would be the time to say, yep, we nailed it, or we were off a little bit. And then you should, when you're evaluating a system, you should interview members of management to make sure they're happy. Observe the users in the computer operations while they're actually running the new system, not the test environment, the real system. Read all the documentation and training materials, make sure that all makes sense. Examine the source documents, output samples, all those kinds of things. And you can even use questionnaires to go through and say, what parts did you like, what parts did you not? Is there any part of the system that has slowed you down? Is there a particular field or form which isn't working as well as you think it ought to? And they'll tell you. And then on page 489, you have the final report. And so at the end of the SDLC, you basically going to have this final report to management. And it's going to have the final version of all the documentation, any planned or enhancements that you've discovered along the way. Because, this is a moving train, right? You put a system in, you think, okay, I'm done. Well, of course not. As soon as you put it in place, somebody's going to say, well, you should have included this feature. And you go, ooh. So you just you don't necessarily implement that change right then and there, but you make a list. Make a list of enhancements and changes that people have asked or talked about. Very cool. Recap all the system development cost, all the schedules, comparison of the actual cost to what you predicted the costs were going to be. And so this post-implementation evaluation, and then you go in and say, here's the whole thing. So that final report is sort of like that ISO checklist. You measured, you evaluated, and you did something with the evaluation. You actually made a decision based upon the output of that. Chapter summary on page 490. Let's just go through it rather quickly. Okay, so system implementation consists of application development, testing, installation, and the evaluation at the end. Structured development relies heavily on those, data flow diagrams, things of that nature. System developers can use generic tools to help them translate the system logic into actual functions. Tools include entity relationship, flowchart, pseudocode, those kind of things. Agile development, the customer creates user stories. Cohesion measures the module's scope and processing characteristics. Coupling measures relationships and interdependence. The 4 steps of creating a structured chart. Programmers perform desk checking, code review, unit testing. And then we have system documentation and operational documentation, user documentation. During the installation process, you establish the operational or production environment where you can play. Everyone who interacts with a new system should receive training. Everyone who touches the system should receive training. Data conversion is often necessary when you're installing something to replace an existing system. System changeover options. There's several options, and don't kid yourself that you're going to take the least expensive one, because that's going to come back to bite you. The post-implementation evaluation, and then final report to management. So, that is the end of the chapter. We only got one more chapter to go. So see you again in just a few.